So learning and development is changing fast, but we still need it. Of course we do. It's critical for the future of our organizations and for even keeping up with all the changes that are going on right now. So how is L&D going to change though? How can we prepare? Well, a discussion about that is coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams. This is the HR Hub, and on the show we talk about anything related to HR. You can listen here on the YouTube channel, or you can subscribe to the podcast to keep learning from my outstanding guests. So today my guest is again Josh Cardoz. Josh is the Chief Creative and Learning Officer at Sponge, which is a learning agency that helps companies create better learning experiences. He spent over 2 decades figuring out how to make workplaces or workplace learning actually stick. I should do a whole discussion with you about that. And he's particularly interested in humans in a disruptive era in the workforce. And all of this has him thinking about the future of L&D. Hi, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing great, Andrea. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on. With all the discussion around how AI can, all these customized learning plans, I'm really curious about this conversation. So starting at the beginning, tell me what's happening in the L&D industry right now that has you concerned for L&D professionals.
I think if my concern wasn't immediately covered with my excitement, I'd be much more concerned. The piece that excites me, that is in the concern of where L&D is right now, is that the existential crisis that has been in our industry for decades has finally been brought to its kind of abrupt, logical, absurd conclusion. And that is, for years, any good learning practitioner in our field has always been frustrated and tired with being I always call it the learning stuff meat grinder, where it's just like you've been told by someone in the org, go build some stuff, and you feel like that's your job, build a training, package it here. And this idea of L&D being a content generator, when really there's been a yearning from progressive learning practitioners, so I'm actually so much more. Help me understand what the business is trying to do. Help me really help people in terms of critical shifts in behavior, culture, and capability, all of those things. The AI conversation has really pushed that to its limit. And on one side, we now are at a point of tremendous progress of taking this highly inefficient model of L&D exists as a cost center, that too, to the business to produce courseware. And it's being blown out of the water by AI saying, well, I can do that too. If the goal is to just produce sort of generic style courseware, well, AI can do it too. And it can do it a lot faster. It can do it a lot cheaper. It can, and the exciting part for me, and that very sensitive, of course, to the fact that these are people's jobs and livelihoods and career paths that are being affected, is that it is finally putting a critical conversation on why does L&D exist? And what is really the value that you can offer to the business? And I think go ahead.
Why does it exist? Can I interrupt you on that conversation and just what's your take on why it exists? And then maybe you can pick up where I interrupted you, if you can remember.
So why does L&D exist? It exists in the way that it always should have existed, and that is a value creation center for the business. And the missing link to all of that has always been L&D being disconnected from business outcomes and business initiatives, as if it's this lonely island that just kind of sits on the side and waits to be told by some sophisticated series of torch lighting of go deliver another training, go build another training. This is a moment actually for L&D to break free from that model and say, leave the content production to tools that can rapidly build things, and even better, actually deliver far more sophisticated learning experiences than we ever could before. And I'm talking in the realms of in the flow of work or personalization, and I can expand on that more. But L&D exists to create value for the business. And that is such a radical statement to make, depending on who you are and how you sit into your organization, that it's actually kind of it's a liberating concept of what does that even mean? What does it mean to create value for the business? Well, how does your business work? How does your business make money? How does your business generate value? And what's the role of people in getting there? And that is the heart of where L&D should have always existed. It's more D, less L. And how do we develop people? And how do we, and you mentioned off the top about how learning is needed more than ever in an organization. I 100% agree. As long as we challenge ourselves to understand that what learning looks like in an organization may be fundamentally different, but learning is definitely needed more than ever because the pace at which organizations are moving, the skills that we need, the skills we needed yesterday versus the skills we need today are just irrecognizable. And you have roles. And I always say that learning people or change people, you have a critical role in helping people change at work for the sake of their careers, for the sake of their next promotion, for the sake of future proofing themselves, for the sake of delivering value to the organization. That's your role. That's why you exist.
Okay. No, I had interrupted you. Do you know where I
was lost. Yeah,
okay.
That's okay.
All right, we'll go on to the next part. In our earlier conversation, you described AI as a double-edged sword, and I want you to talk a little about the edges of the AI sword in an L&D context.
The one thing that I think AI is doing in real time, and so probably 2 months from now, this will probably already be kind of course corrected, but the pace of innovation here, which L&D has always been privileged to. I've always said that L&D has always been the last mover in an organization, not the first mover. It always got to see everything else happening in an organization and steal all the good stuff. Steal it from marketing, steal it from sales, steal it from performance consulting, wherever that may be. And the great thing about being a last mover in the AI space, and that's a controversial statement, is that you actually get to reap all the good learnings that are happening. And the part that excites me about AI in this particular moment is the stuff that, as a learning practitioner, that I've started my career writing those courses, building those courses as well too. The ability to do dynamic, personalized learning at a scale that is unprecedented has always been the dream and has always been the challenge, to be honest, of this legacy model of the big fat e-learning course. And I think we'll look back on this 20 years from now of like what hubris we had as an organization, as leaders, to expect that one course could address the needs of 10,000 people. You know what I mean? Like we'll look back on it and laugh,
Yes.
But that's the model that we had to work with. And we're entering an era now of extreme personalization, extremely high relevance, so that, you're seeing some really sophisticated tools that can get all your data points about who's on your team, what their communication styles are, and I'll zip back a response to the way you coach this individual and that coach that individual. And that's done in a snap of a finger. And all of a sudden, you know how to work with your team as a team leader in a way that might have taken you 2 years to do the right workshops and upskilling and all that kind of stuff as well there. So this rapid pace of in the flow performance support combined with real-time feedback, combined with extreme personalization, is just tremendously exciting. And tremendously exciting in terms of just breaking the monolith course model. And, I was joking earlier about like, how dare we have thought one course could address the needs of 10,000 people. And so this idea of getting the balance right, of course. So you can imagine being a compliance officer who's actually quite scared at the concept of 10,000 versions of a company message, right? That doesn't sound very compliant at all. Maybe I need to have a single course in order to do it. So there will be a balance between those things. But this is where the double-edged sword of AI comes in for me as well too. And you and I have spoken, previously about Generation Numb and mobilizing Generation Numb. And one of the things that has always stood out to me, and I take very personally, I think about it at work all the time, is the idea of isolation at work and loneliness at work. And the thing about AI that on one side is quite exciting in terms of personalization one person's personalization is another person's echo chamber. And there's
Yes.
something, the exhaustive dream of self-paced learning to its limit is actually you're just further in your own little box, taking your own little learning. And there's actually something very special about community-based learning, something very
Yes.
special about taking a course that all of us can react to. And I think you and I both remember a day when we'd walk into the coffee room and our boss would talk about some brand new message, and all of us would talk behind his or her back for the next rest of the day about how much we loved it or hated it, or that. And there's something very
Yes.
kind of special about that, because
Yes.
there's a shared experience.
Yes.
And part of what leans us more into the world of sort of digital everything is that they just become kind of isolated experiences. And we talk a lot about in the larger world about the death of monoculture. And your top 40 radio was irrecognizable for what it was 20 years ago. Dare
Yeah.
you to name an artist that you recognize on any of them? And I think the same thing happens at work, is that we lose a sense of monoculture by diving into extreme personalization. And this is where we need to get the balance right with AI, is that, to quote Uncle Ben from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And we just need to have enough checks on balancing the human side of learning.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is at the end of the day, is that humans
Mm-hmm.
still need to be human,
Yes.
unless you've just decided to say, well, we actually don't need humans in this workflow, and cut straight to the chase, which is a different conversation for a different day. But as long as you need humans to learn at work, you need to remember that your experiences need to be human as well too.
Uh, so think about someone who's been doing that old school L&D. They're pumping out the courses. The supervisor comes to them and says, uh, "I need a course about, I don't know, communication." That's my favorite. Uh, and they've done it. What should they be thinking about now? How should they change?
Well, the first thing I would say to this individual is, don't be worried, because I know it's very easy to have imposter syndrome in this moment about, oh, I need to do more of this. And we, like, I consider our agency to be at the forefront of learning experiences, and we still have lots of clients that just want some bread and butter e-learning. So
Mm,
everyone's on their own journey is
right.
sort of the
Yep.
first thing. But
Yeah.
the second piece of that is, start to really understand your business. And, the advice that I always give in sort of mentoring learning practitioners in our field is that no one's going to come to you. No one's going to come to you and say, hey, learning leader, I need you to be more data accountable. I need you to really lean into better ROI. I need you to move away from vanity metrics tied to engagement and completion, and move more into behavioral metrics and predictive metrics. No one's going to ask you for that. And I think that's the challenge, the cusp that we're at right now. But take ownership of that. Take ownership of that conversation. Build the measurement plan that you wish you had. Go and get familiar with business leaders. Knock on anyone's door who's willing to give you a cup of coffee and say, can we just chat about what your problems are? And oftentimes, you'll get so far down their problems that you'll be able to extract the people problem in that. So I'll give you the example of a sales leader. They know exactly what's wrong with their team. They know exactly why they're not selling. We need more leads here. We need more strategic selling there. We need all those types of things. What they don't feel comfortable engaging in a conversation with you about is, what are your training needs? That feels like such a huge jump. And also goes to show them, I'm very mindful of my language as a learning leader to the rest of the business. Also, you kind of show your hand a bit there to say, well, I'm only interested in building courses,
Hmm.
you know? But if you go in with sort of a curious mindset and you're eager to learn about what makes that part of the business tick, then you can follow up that conversation next time you chat and say, I've been thinking a lot about your challenge. It seems like what we really need to get our people to is from here to here, from thinking this way to thinking that way, from these sets of behaviors that you're really struggling with your B, C performers, to here, which your top performers are doing. I've got an idea for how we can build a program that helps affect it. And boy, what a breath of fresh air you become to the organization, rather than saying, I've been told I need to build a sales essential training program. I'm here to conduct a needs analysis. And they're just like, who are you? you know?
Right. I'm
Yeah. Can you
looking
make
for,
it engaging? Like stuff like that.
yeah. Um, I've had so many of these conversations where people say, get to know the business. You should get to know the business. Do you have any specific, like, implementable tips to get to know the business that someone could take away right away?
The probably the best one is, and I say this as someone who leads a team that has to get to know our clients' businesses very quickly, is do all the homework you can before you get to an actual conversation.
Mhm.
So this is where like this is the future proofing of L&D, if you ask me here, is that like everyone else in the business actually is incredibly data accountable and knows exactly how the business makes money. Why wouldn't you? Just because you reside in people, just because you think your job is to kind of create contained knowledge pieces, like
Mhm.
there's no excuse for that. So if you work for a large organization, it's actually really easy to get to know the business because it's all publicly available, right? If you're a publicly listed company, go read the shareholder reports,
Mm.
attend every single town hall, and be curious. That's the other piece as well too. Oh, well, our CEO said something on the town hall in your next manager one-to-one. What do they mean by that? What are they trying to do there? What does that look like? And what's our role in order to get there? You know? And so there's something very tangible there about it's not get to know the business as in like, have you seen our company website lately? Get
Yes.
to know the business in a very critical way.
Mhm.
Because when you understand the critical role of people enablement for anything that's on a CEO's agenda, then you actually understand what an important role you have to play in there. And actually how you've been
Mm.
underselling your value this entire time. And so there's this element of earning the right to show up in those conversations with confidence to say, oh, well, and you'll often hear it as like a slip of the tongue. That's how that's when you, especially when you talk to people outside of people teams, L&D teams, you'll speak to kind of like a safety officer or a sales leader or whatever it is. And they say something like, oh, honestly, I think people just, you know, Google your clients before you get into a call. Is that so hard to ask for? You like you'll get this kind of like half vent, half blurt, and then you go, okay, so let's talk about the performance moment then. So if we can talk about what great performance looks like, what if we can talk about the 5 most important performance moments that are going to show up in the next 6 months for you? Now, what are the behaviors like in that? Now, anyone who knows they're learning stuff knows I'm kind of doing a needs analysis in real time with you. But it's kind of like shifting the conversation to what matters to the business versus this kind of indulgent activity of I need to get my learning objectives right.
Mhm.
I'll be the first person to tell you as a learning leader, I couldn't care less about learning objectives.
When we talked earlier, you had said something around the lines of don't use the word training, or
Yeah, yeah.
can you slip that in? Because I thought that was awesome. And I'm basically fishing for that.
So something, and I mentioned this before about having learning in my job title and kind of having a love-hate relationship with the word learning. We actually do something at Sponge. We have an engagement model with our clients through the lens of what we call the compelling question, which is
Yeah.
kind of like the strategic narrative for our engagement. And there's clear rules to a compelling question. I've instituted them. It's my fault that we have it there. 5 rules for a compelling question. I won't bore you with the other 4, but the most interesting one for the sake of today's conversation is that in your compelling question, you're not allowed to use the word training or learning, which is quite controversial. We're a learning agency at the end of the day, but that allows us to not get distracted from leading the witness,
Mm.
which stops you from having a question like, how do we build an engaging training that inspires people to sell better? That's a terrible question. That is and it's certainly not a compelling question. And that's the other part of the, number 5 of the compelling and question ingredients that needs to be compelling. And my definition of compelling is what gets the eyes of the business that we're actually trying to solve this challenge. And the business is not interested in engaging learning that sells better, that feels like 1,000 jumps of logic. So what is the question that helps get to the root cause of what we're trying to do? So could be, how do we enable people to have a stronger strategic mindset when entering discovery calls with our clients? Focused, compelling, feels like it's solvable as well too. And so the idea of diminishing the role of learning and training is that, sure, on the other side of it could be some form of learning experience. But the point is that you're not leading with the format. And I think sometimes the challenge for us as learning professionals is that we live in this little bubble of like things can only happen as long as it fits neatly into a RISE module box or a storyline box or some other sort of courseware facilitated boxes. It doesn't have to be. Focus on solving business problems, and then you take care of the people enablement side so that you don't have to distract your critical stakeholders by saying, I'm just trying to build a training here.
What is the future of L&D going to be? Like, what in the future is an L&D professional going to be doing? And if you can keep this somewhat short because we're running out of time.
Well, I mean, anyone's crystal ball here, I would say, is probably a bit disingenuous. I'll tell you, whatever the role is, it'll be more exciting than it ever has been. And I know that feels like quite a weird statement to make in what feels like a very scary time for the industry and definitely going through an existential crisis. But I always come back to, I have a background in teaching. I went to teachers college and I kind of got grilled on the fundamentals of what great learning is. And great learning is communal. Great learning is personalized. Great learning is relevant. And yes, I'll sneak in this world. Great learning is engaging, but it doesn't need to be engaging in the way that you always thought it was. And the great thing about where the future of L&D is going is that we used to just have a very finite stack of tools in our toolkit. Now it seems like we have a seemingly unlimited set of tools in our toolkit. And that's exciting as long as you're willing to lean into that. And it's scary if you're just going to hold on to, well, I only exist to create training and my job is to only create courses. And I'd probably say the last piece of the future of L&D that really excites me is that it feels like, and I'll say this quite quietly because I don't want to jinx it, but it feels like we're finally getting on the cusp of getting measurement done properly. Because we have been teetering on, well, how do I even get this data point, and we're seeing the LMS sweat in real time because the entire tech world is coming for it right now, but saying, well, actually all the data points can be found in the flow of work, in these performance moments being done. I'm so excited that we're at that point now, because now we can actually say we're delivering impact. We're actually delivering on what needs to be able to be done. So that's where hopefully the future of L&D is going.
Same. Like on an HR front, same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Double-edged sword.
Excuse me. Where does Sponge fit into all of this? And where can they learn more about you and about, and I guess about Sponge?
Yeah, where Sponge fits into all of this is that if this sounds incredibly complex and you're trying to do it with your large group of people, well, we can help. And I think probably the way that I can spin it for you is that we have the range to be that bread and butter e-learning course creator if you need us to be. But obviously, we're tremendously excited about where we're going in terms of how do we enable that business shift with your people, and how do we shift your people in terms of culture, behavior, and capability. And of course, please feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. Happy to chat with you about all things learning and beyond. I'm highly approachable and extremely sarcastic as well, too.
You weren't sarcastic today, though.
I'm on my best behavior today, Andrea.
Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to close it. Well, thanks, Josh. I love that. And I'm thinking about that very tactical, useful bit of advice you gave at the end there around going to a client and saying, not a client, just someone in the business, can we chat about your problems? And who isn't going to want to chat about their problems? And have, someone to listen to them and be a thought partner. So think about doing that next time. Josh and I did another episode discussing Generation Numb. It's that overwhelm in the face of all of this change. And I really encourage you to listen to that because that's fascinating. A link to that is right here. Thanks for watching out there, and I'll see you next time.